Hello and welcome to another Brawl video. Today we're checking out what's likely the most powerful commander out of Edge of Eternities for this format, a mono-red warp deck built around Tannuk, Steadfast Second, a 4-mana 3/5, saying other creatures we control have haste, which will come in handy once we start warping artifacts and the red creature cards from our hand onto the battlefield for just 2 and a red. So 3 mana to cheat out some of the most expensive artifacts and creatures. They will immediately attack thanks to haste, and then at the beginning of our end step, thanks to the warp ability, we get to put them in exile, as opposed to maybe having to sacrifice them, which we're used to with cards like Perforos Bronze-Blooded or Sneak Attack, which are cards that have inspired Tannuk as well. We're not playing those aforementioned cards, but instead if we take a look at our deck breakdown, it's pretty simple. We've got on the one hand some mana acceleration, mostly 2 mana artifacts, so we can already play Tannuk on turn 3. Then we've got a few removal spells, mostly sweepers that can deal 3 damage to everything in play, which Tannuk can conveniently survive, and also sets up the curve of maybe ramp into a sweeper into Tannuk on the following turn, so we can slow down the opponent's game plan. And then, of course, last but not least is the cards we're trying to warp onto the battlefield, starting at 5 mana, going all the way up to 9 mana, with some powerful artifacts like the Skitterbeam Battalion and Portal to Phyrexia, which also have great synergy with our commander. And then a small miscellaneous section contains some non-basic land hate, as well as some more card draw engines, and the warped space also has excellent synergy with the warp mechanic, and we'll go over those in just a second. So that's kind of our rough breakdown. So now for the deep dive, starting with our mana acceleration, we get to play with Chrome Mox, which can give us an extra mana for free if we imprint a red card. Then we've got 2 red mana creatures, which are a pretty recent development, Sunset Strike Master, and then Edge of Eternities also introduced the Zookeeper, which can tap for a red. And then we've got another colorless 2-mana artifact creature with Ornithopter of Paradise. And then we've got our more usual 2-mana ramp artifacts with Arcane Signet, which is the best one. Cold Steel Hearts and Guardian Idol enter tapped. There's Mindstone making a colorless, can draw a card if we sacrifice it. Solar Transformer also enters tapped, and the Iron Crag. And then we can also play Ruby Medallion, discounting our red spells by 1, so still sets up a turn 3 Tannuk, and also makes it easier to warp cards, because if we're warping, we're still technically casting, so then we can maybe warp red creatures for just 1 and a red. And then at 3 mana, we've got some more ramp artifacts. Cursed Mirror can maybe copy a creature once it enters. There's Fable, which can ramp thanks to the treasures from the Goblin Shaman token, can also improve our hand with Chapter 2. Heraldic Banner, naming red, can pump our creatures up as well. Then File of Galadriel can also make a mana, potentially draw extra cards once we're empty-handed. Relic of Legends can easily tap Tannuk to generate an extra mana, so that can also give us a small mana boost. There's a Worn Power Stone, which makes 2 mana if we get to untap with it. And then we get to some of the more expensive spells, which of course don't curve perfectly into Tannuk, but are still pretty useful if we need to replay Tannuk if it gets removed once or twice. And those are also still a way to ramp out our more expensive spells without relying on our commander. The Fire Crystal is a juiced up version of Ruby Medallion, also gives our creatures haste and can activate it for 6 mana. Solemn Simulacrum can find a land when it enters, draws a card when it dies, so this one's also still fine to potentially warp it and then cast it for 4 mana afterwards, so we can ramp multiple times. And then Gilded Lotus does cost 5 mana, but can tap for triple red right away, so we can maybe play it with Tannuk on the battlefield already, and then still warp something afterwards, and then we'll have even more mana on the following turn. And then our removal includes at 1 mana Lightning Bolt, of course, as well as Spikefield Hazard, which we can play as a land, dealing 1 damage. And then there's Abrade, dealing 3 or destroying an artifact. Misium Mortars can deal 4 to 1 creature, or if we overload it for 6 mana, can deal 4 to all opposing creatures. And then a Pyroclasm deals 2 to everything. And then our 3 mana board wipes include Anger of the Gods, Brotherhood's End, which can also maybe deal with artifacts, Slagstorm, and Sweltering Suns, all dealing 3 damage. Sweltering Suns can also be cycled. And then we get to the cards we're trying to warp onto the battlefield, starting with a Dragonhawk, which is excellent. The more 4-powered creatures we have on the battlefield triggers both when it enters and when it attacks, so we can trigger it twice if we warp it with Tannuk on the battlefield. Goldspan Dragon, also kind of a ramp card, making treasures. Then Ilharg can potentially cheat some other creatures onto the battlefield once it attacks. Now it does mean that if we put a creature into play tapped and attacking with Ilharg's ability, we miss out on that creature's attack trigger, since the creature's already entering tapped and attacking, but we still have plenty of creatures with simply enter the battlefield abilities, which are still good to go. Then there's Twin Flame Tyrant, doubling our damage output, so with enough other creatures on the battlefield we can potentially attack for lethal in one turn. Ancient Copper Dragon gets much more powerful with haste, as we can immediately connect and make a whole bunch of treasure tokens. Clive can potentially refresh our hand, gets better the more Red Devotion we have. Then there's Combustible Gearhulk, which is also quite good in a deck with such a high curve, as the opponent's more likely to let us draw cards, or we can just randomly reveal a bunch of expensive spells and win the game on the spot. Etali Primal Storm, also very good with haste, as we get to immediately trigger it and cast some other free spells. Inferno Titan triggers both when it enters and when it attacks, so that's potentially 6 damage we get to spread across any number of targets. The Red Overlord is quite similar, just deals damage in chunks of 4 damage each. Then there's the Storm Scale Scion, gets better if we can cast additional spells in the same turn to increase our storm count, and then those dragon copies will stay on the battlefield, and then just the Scion itself gets put into exile through the warp mechanic, so it leaves some nice leftovers. And then the Trumpeting Carnosaur can also be discarded for 3 damage, but still fine to warp, as we'll discover 5 and potentially put something else into play. And then at 7 mana, there's Angrat's Marauders, pretty similar to the Twin Flame Tyrant, doubling our damage output. There's Balefire Dragon, which if it connects with the opponent can essentially wipe their board, dealing 6 to all their creatures. Dragon Mage, if it connects, lets each player discard their hand and draw 7, which will usually benefit us. Terror of Mount Velus, another way to present lethal out of nowhere by giving our entire team double strike when it enters. Dracoseth can deal a ton of damage when it attacks. We've got Meteor Golem destroying a non-land permanent when it enters. Threefold Thunderhulk will trigger both when it enters and when it attacks, making 3 Gnome tokens. Then at 8 mana, there's a Cityscape Leveler, also triggers the ability when we warp it, since warping is just an alternate way of casting it, and then it triggers once again when it attacks, destroying an opposing non-land permanent, replacing it with a Power Stone token. And then there's the Battleship, which we can also warp, even though it's not a creature unless we manage to station it in time, but still gets to destroy a non-creature permanent and then deal 4 damage to each creature, so Tannuk will survive that as well. There's the Maelstrom Colossus, we get to Cascade if we warp it, potentially hitting some other exciting cards along the way. And then Sundering Titan, a good way to blow up a bunch of lanes, especially if the opponent's playing multiple colors. And then Skitterbeam Battalion, one of the more exciting ones to warp, as we can warp it and essentially get 3 4/4 creatures, and 2 of those 4/4 tokens will stick around. And then a Portal to Phyrexia, making the opponent sacrifice 3 creatures, and then we're probably not going to get to Upkeep trigger unless we cast it for 9 mana afterwards, but still a nice way to clear the board. And then our miscellaneous section has both Winter Moon and Blood Moon to punish greedy mana bases. We've got the Palantir, which is also quite good in a deck with so many high mana values. The opponent will have to decide between either letting us draw extra cards or potentially taking a lot of damage. Then there's the One Ring, which can also be a decent card draw engine. And finally, the Charred Foyer, but mostly the Warped Space is what we're interested in. A 6 mana room, saying once each turn we can pay 0 mana rather than pay the mana cost of a spell in exile. So if we warped something beforehand, now we get to cast that card from exile for free, so that's also very nice. And then Edge of Eternities also introduced some very powerful lands into the format, the best one probably being Ancient Tomb, tapping for double colorless at a cost of 2 life, so that can set up some explosive starts. I'm also trying a Cathedral of War, which does enter tapped, but also has Exalted, so whenever a creature we control attacks alone, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and we're often attacking with just 1 creature through the Warp ability. And then I'm also trying the Gemstone Caverns, which if we're on the draw and we have it in our opening hand, we can reveal it and then pitch a card to it to put it in play, so then we can also start ramping a turn sooner. And Ugin's Labyrinth can occasionally imprint an expensive colorless spell, and then it can also produce 2 mana for us and can later pick up that spell again. And then we have mostly just basic mountains. Crucible can occasionally make a pair of 1/1s, and Arena of Glory can also give our creatures haste if we exert it, which can also come in handy if we don't control Tannuk, but it's mostly Ancient Tomb that I'm excited to try out. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the play, facing Chulane, so kind of a banned creature value deck. Our hand has Signet into Sweltering Suns. I mean, that's a reasonable start, just need 1 more land and hope they can't remove Tannuk. Because then a Balefire Dragon could maybe wipe the opponent's board. So just need to draw 1 more land here. Alright, still keeping us in suspense. Could also cycle the Sweltering Suns, but then we're not playing Tannuk turn 3. Opponent has a Feaster. Yeah, I kind of want to just destroy it, because that's gonna discount a bunch of spells. Although then again, if we're gonna clear the board with Balefire, maybe it doesn't matter, and I should just focus on hitting my land drops. Alright, so now we're playing a turn behind. If they remove Tannuk, it's gonna be tough. Could play Crystal first, but yeah, I think we still try Tannuk. I guess Crystal could set up a hasty Atali on the following turn if we draw another land. So, we'll see. A hasty Copper Dragon's also not bad, actually. Opponent casting a cheap Beast Whisperer into Elvish Mystic. Well, I think I'm still going for Tannuk, since we didn't draw the land to guarantee Crystal into a 6-drop. And then hope to just untap with Tannuk, and then there's a lot of ways we can clean up the board. Chulane enters, that's fine. And I carried it. Draw 2 cards. The white mana could still represent Swords to Plowshares, but I think I gotta go for Balefire Dragon, since the opponent's board is getting out of hand, and there's nothing I can really do alongside it. So that connects, wipe your board. And now things are a bit more manageable. So next turn we can maybe try Copper Dragon, and with the extra mana I can still maybe cast something afterwards. The Scion kind of lends itself to storming off with a Copper Dragon. Anvil discounts creatures by 2. So they could still cast a 4-drop. This is going to be the Wild Guide with Offspring. And get to untap. And yeah, let's go for Copper Dragon, since that's probably better than Atali here. And don't really want to attack with Tannuk. Roll the 16, that's pretty good. So cast, let's see, 16 mana. Can I go Crystal into Inferno Titan? I'm just gonna cast it instead of warping it. 1, 2, 3. And then Scion as kind of the cherry on top here. We'll save a tally for next turn. Alright. Time for the opponent to cast the River's Rebuke, probably. Chulane is back. Into Marvin, which they got to cast for free thanks to Anvil, so that's pretty sweet. And a Leafkin. So they do get to draw a couple more cards. 1 card in hand. It's gotta be something pretty specific, maybe a fog effect can save them, but nope. Opponent scoops it up. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Y'shtola, so an Esper control deck. Our hand could use an extra land or 2, but we have an Ancient Tomb, so that helps. Yeah, I'll try it. So, can play a turn 2 Zookeeper or Strike Master. Now I could go Mind Stone into one of the aforementioned cards. Let's make it Strike Master. Edict will take care of it. So if possible, we want to play Tannuk with enough mana to still warp afterwards. Although if our opponent keeps up a counterspell, it doesn't matter too much. This turn, I guess it's Zookeeper and then probably cycle Sweltering Suns. And then next turn I can maybe play Tannuk and warp. So at least if they have spot removal, we get a bit of value out of it. Opponent's gonna Murderous Rider the Zookeeper. So they must have more removal in hand, or maybe they want to keep their counter spells for Tannuk. I doubt they're gonna tap out for Y'shtola here. But I guess it's possible, since we would not have the mana to play Tannuk and warp. Worn Power Stone could be useful, and an Abrade. So yeah, I think this is still more of a setup turn, unfortunately. Play Power Stone and pass. So opponent might be able to trigger Y'shtola and draw an extra card, although at least that would incentivize them to tap out in their turn as I play Palantir, which I could also Abrade. So may as well do that now, since we've already lost 4 lives, so Y'shtola's gonna trigger regardless. They do still have a blue mana up, so Wash Away on Tannuk is a possibility. But I've gotta try this. Alright, that works. So now probably start with Portal to deal with Y'shtola. Or I could go for Thunderhulk, which does leave behind a bunch of tokens. Yeah, maybe that's still preferable. Get a board presence before we Portal. Maybe if they have a Stifle for the trigger, that would be interesting. Attack all out. If they take 4, they would draw another card, so they might decide not to block Thunderhulk. And the opponent stifles the trigger, leaving Thunderhulk in play, which could actually work out if they end up wiping the board and we resolve Portal. Y'shtola attacks. I'll block, but yeah, feels like they're casting a sweeper here. Possible it's a sweeper that just gives -3 to everything, like a Toxic Deluge. Yeah, in which case I could have maybe just blocked with a 1/1, forcing them to lose more life. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, so a land would have let me cast Portal. Now, I guess we can go Tannuk, play Transformer, and then next turn I can cast Portal. We have been dealing ourselves a bunch of damage with Ancient Tomb, but I think it's been worth it so far. Opponent's looking through the graveyard, maybe a Treasure Cruise or some other Delve spell. Void Rent answers Tannuk. Back to the command zone, I think, even though we could reanimate it with Portal. But if I play Portal and they destroy it, I would be pretty sad. And we've got other creatures we can return. Mizzy Mordor's decent answer to Y'shtola as well. So maybe I do want to wait for the opponent to present a creature before I cast a Portal, and for now play Fable. And pass. They might play Murderous Rider to block the Shaman, and then Portal looks a bit better. Opponents go to Chromox. So best case scenario is they tap out for Y'shtola here. Narset also would have been pretty good at stopping Chapter 2 from Fable. But I'm pretty happy with my hand as is. But yeah, this looks like a Delve spell. Treasure Cruise, draw 3. Still have 3 mana up. Maybe going for Murderous Rider now. Nope, opponent's keeping up mana. So, probably just discard land Mizzium Mortars at that point. And look for more threats. And we found one. Balefire we can also give haste with Arena of Glory. But yeah, I'm not sure if I want to go for it. I guess it forces him to answer the Balefire. Just gotta hope that it's not with a mana drain. And then even if I exert Arena, I will still be able to play Portal next turn. So this might be worth it, so... Play Balefire. I'll let him answer it. If not, they're taking 6 more. Get lost. At least we still get to explore. Should I just drop to 9 so I can explore twice? Sure. Don't need that one. And the storm scale is fine. So the Shaman can now attack past Murderous Rider. And swords my Shaman. Bonus Tails ending the Fable trigger. So that's a pretty nice answer, but now they should be tapped out of interaction for Portal. Which is how we can take over. So they need something to destroy an artifact here. Otherwise we get to reanimate one of our Curve Toppers. Jace lets them brainstorm. With Tannuk we can also give haste to whatever creature we reanimate. Bone says good game. It looks like they may not have found an answer to Portal, and that'll do it. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw with a keepable hand. Turn 2 Ironcrag, turn 3 Tannuk, and then we can start warping, Battalion being one of the better ones. Up against Tatyova, so blue-green landfall. Less likely to have a lot of counter spells, more likely to just wanna do their own thing. And yeah, Burgeoning on turn 1 is kind of where you want it. And it's probably at its best in a Tatyova deck where you keep drawing additional lands to put in play. But yeah, I still gotta play my lands if I want to progress my own plan. Spelunking. So next turn they could already play Tatyova. We'll see if they're out of lands. They are, so that's kind of the limiting factor of Burgeoning. After a while, you don't have lands in hand, but with Tatyova it becomes a lot easier to keep stringing together additional land drops. So they must have drawn a land for turn, cast Into the North. Now 4 mana left for a walk-in closet to replay lands out of the graveyard, although they haven't found any fetch lands yet. Ugin's Labyrinth, we could pitch Battalion, but I would rather have it available to warp. So let's just cast Tannuk. Don't expect him to have a land left. And no counterspell. So yeah, if they tap out for Tatyova, that's fine. Draw a card. And now we can start warping. Can maybe avoid playing an additional land out. Otherwise I could go land, Ironcrag, and then still warp, which maybe sets up double warp on the following turn. Ilharg is a bit of a nombo with Battalion since we need to cast it to make the extra tokens, but Ilharg plus Dragonhawk could be good. Yeah, it still seems worth it to play one more land out, even though it's kind of scary with Tatyova and the Burgeoning. No need to warp Ironcrag. And then there's a lot of options here, need to select the correct one. So warp the 9 mana version and smash. And then Dragonhawk with these 4/4 tokens also looks a lot more impressive. Tireless Provisioner can make more mana. Rampant Growth draws a card. And Azusa for additional lands. And they have a fetch lane, so that's where you want to be when you've got walk-in closets with Azusa. So yeah, opponent gets to go off. Hopefully they don't find any relevant interaction. So next turn, the plan is probably still to warp Dragonhawk as opposed to warping Ilharg and putting in the Dragonhawk that way. Because if we use Ilharg to put in Dragonhawk, we miss out on the attack trigger, since Ilharg puts Dragonhawk into play tapped and attacking. So then we would potentially miss out on a lot of extra damage. So we're actually kind of hoping to draw another large creature we can put in play with Ilharg's ability, so we can warp both Ilharg and Dragonhawk and get the most damage possible. Opponent's got 1,000,000 mana thanks to Provisioner and Azusa. I think they're out of extra land drops. Explorer can still play an extra land. I'm glad they don't have Strip Mine in circulation, otherwise we could lose our lands pretty quickly. Alright, so opponent's got a mere 7 treasure tokens, 2 food tokens, so that can also gain them more life. And they found a bounce spell for Tannuk. Map the frontier, 2 more lands. Enter untapped with Spelunking. Well, this was a very impressive turn. Luckily they milled to River's Rebuke. But yeah, I have to imagine they have some interaction in hand now. And a Mossborn Hydra, that's gonna present lethal next turn for sure. So it's not looking good. If I cast Dragonhawk, it doesn't have haste, so I need to play Tannuk first. So then I need to play a land as well, triggering everything. Tannuk resolves. Warp Dragonhawk. And get some triggers. And attack. So we do have a decent amount of damage coming in with Dragonhawk triggers. But with all those food tokens, I don't think it's enough to win the game necessarily. Alright, never mind. I guess I'll take it. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw. This hand's got a nice bit of ramp. We're missing a Curve Topper to warp into play. But I do like the early Lightning Bolt against a pretty aggressive green-white deck. So it's maybe still worth a try. Pretty likely to draw something expensive in the meantime. And the opponent might also have a removal spell or two, in which case having the extra mana to redeploy Tannuk could come in handy. And there's a Balefire Dragon already. Pretty nice way to deal with a bunch of creatures. So Kutzil doesn't let us cast spells during the opponent's turn. Opponent's got to turn 1 Esper Sentinel even. And Kellen adventured, so could Lightning Bolt to Sentinel now, or I can just play Ornithopter Paradise, and then next turn maybe go Banner plus Bolt, deal with Kutzil. So they don't get to draw off Sentinel twice. Could of course just play Tannuk, and then set up Balefire. So we'll see. Solemn both fine to cast or to warp. It's going to be a Charitable Levy. Non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast. Yeah, that's kind of annoying. So, in that case, I just play Solemn, or I can go for Tannuk. Player casts a non-creature spell, collection counter, 3 or more collection counters, sack it, draw a card. Okay, so yeah, it's basically Tannuk versus Solemn. Could just go for Tannuk, honestly, make them remove it. This is symmetrical, so their non-creature spells also cost more. A Forbidding Spirit is actually pretty good here. Cost 2 more to attack, although I can still pay for it and warp a creature. So, yeah, I could warp a Balefire, destroy their board, or we can go for Combustible Gearhulk, deal a bunch of damage, or draw some cards. So options aplenty. And warping Solemn to ramp, also an option. Wait for them to commit more threats before we cast a Balefire. Yeah, having to pay the Sentinel tax discourages me from wanting to put a non-creature spell on the stack. So maybe it is just combustible. Opponent took the damage, only takes 3, so they got away with 1. And then I'll attack, paying 2 mana. And they took it. So that's still realistic to hardcast for 6. And if our opponent commits a few more creatures to the board, a Balefire looks good. It's going to be a Welcoming Vampire, which can actually chump Balefire Dragon to soak up its ability. Luckily for us, they did not put a +1 counter on it. So now we can still take it out with a Lightning Bolt. So how do we feel about just going Solemn Bolt a Vampire? They do get a card out of the Esper Sentinel, but that might be alright. Could of course just Bolt and then still warp Balefire to take care of the rest. But I feel like I still want to save it for some scarier creatures. So then, yeah, I'm kind of okay with Solemn plus Bolt. Could also go for Ruby Medallion, pay the Sentinel tax, and then I can Bolt for 1 mana, which is also an option. Or I could even go for Banner and then pay the tax and still Bolt Vampire. Sure. So Tannuk can attack if they try and double block. And we can bolt accordingly. Opponent does try to double block. So unless there's a free spell to protect them, this should be effective. Alright. And now an Aven Mind Sensor, preventing us from searching. And the Phantom to destroy a land. Can only hit non-basics, actually not able to hit our mountain. Otherwise this is a combo. Aven Mind Sensor only lets us look at the top 4. Alright, can we win the game with a Storm Scale Scion? Opponent does have a pair of flyers now, so those are good against our Balefire. So here, I guess we can just warp both dragons, or I can play Ruby Medallion first, and then warp both dragons for just 2 mana, which also increases my storm count for the Scion. Yeah, that seems worth it, even though they get to draw off Sentinel again. Opponent surveils. And smash. So our opponent can survive by chumping with every single creature. But they're gonna concede here. Awesome. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing the Worldseed, one of the spacecraft you can play as a commander. And yeah, I mean, our hand is all in on Tannuk surviving to warp out all sorts of Curve Toppers. Does help that we have Ancient Tomb. So I'm gonna give it a try. If our opponent removes Tannuk, we don't have any ramp to necessarily recast it. Opponent's got a fetch land, which will eventually come in handy if they've got a way to replay lands out of the graveyard, which I'm sure they have. Okay, so next turn play Tannuk. And cross our fingers that it survives a turn at least. And then Ilharg can cheat all sorts of other creatures into play. And white of the Reliquary. Now at least I can also hardcast Ilharg next turn if something bad happens to Tannuk. And yeah, something bad happens. Back to the command zone. So a lot of our creatures won't trigger if I put them in play with Ilharg, since they enter tapped and attacking. So we don't get the Cascade trigger, which happens only when we cast it. We don't get the Leveler trigger. Titan still triggers when it enters, but not when it attacks. And wow, opponent's got a binding for Ilharg. So we can put it back on top. But it's going to take a while to redraw. So hope to draw land for Inferno Titan now. Slagstorm deals with the whites. Yeah, it's probably still worth it. So yeah, things not going to plan. Opponent's got a lot of interaction. And now Klothys can exile cards from graveyard. Alright, I can cast my Inferno Titan, so yeah, Ancient Tomb also doing some heavy lifting. I think I prefer Inferno Titan over replaying Tannuk. Opponent's got a Vorinclex. Can maybe clear it once we put in a Meteor Golem. Also not opposed to trading for Inferno Titan. So I can start by attacking. Opponent takes it, so I could pump once. And still play Ilharg. If they animate Klothys, I can still block it. But yeah, our life total is getting low. Partly because of Ancient Tomb. The One Ring will now protect them. And our opponent's going to start stationing. Drew a Chromox, so that can set up one of my 7-drops. One Ring is indestructible, so is Klothys. I guess I just destroy Vorinclex then. Although it's still scary if they find a creature to crew the Worldseed, because then it hits us for 6. And if they can sack some lands, which I guess this can, we just die. So I probably have to destroy the Worldseed instead. I mean, I guess I can still attack with Ilharg in order to put the Meteor Golem into play. And I can cast Tannuk instead. Sure. So I could have held on to my Chromox potentially. And then Golem back to hand is also pretty useful. So they can put us to 5. Gotta block Vorinclex if they attack with it. Opponent goes digging. And this is forced. May as well double block in case they have instant speed removal, so we don't just die. And what's next? There's gonna be Urg, which can sack lands to gain life, also a combo with their commander. Once they station it, making us lose 2 life if they sack a land. And a Blood-Soaked Insight. Alright, so now it's my turn. I can warp a bunch of stuff and presumably win the game here. So warp Leveler, warp Colossus, maybe start there. Find my own One Ring. And yeah, opponent scoops it up already, but yeah, Leveler can come in, destroying Urg, and then we can still Meteor Golem thanks to Ilharg, although there's nothing left for me to destroy. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Baral, so mono blue counter spells. Not gonna be very fun, since they'll have plenty of ways to shut down Tannuk. Besides on the stack, they'll also have ways to remove abilities of creatures in play. But I'll try it. Got a few ramp creatures to help out. Maybe your opponent taps out at some point. Gemstone would not quite have helped since we're on the play as well. So I'll play the Strike Master first. And hits a bit harder if we decide to attack. Alright, opponent did tap out for Baral, so I can resolve Tannuk, although this kind of implies that our opponent has a way to shut it down. One of those auras comes to mind. So alternatively, could play the Zookeeper, but yeah, still go for Tannuk here. Just hope they can't shut it down permanently. Alright, looks like we get to untap. Now, of course, they can still counter whatever we try to warp into play. But in the case of Cascade, we still get a Cascade trigger. So this turn start with a Zookeeper, which will also have haste. So that can immediately tap for mana. And then now warp Colossus. Get the Cascade trigger. And hit a Thunderhulk, so that was a nice hit. That resolves. Also has haste, so gets to trigger, make some tokens, attack, make some more tokens. And everyone gets to attack, so yeah, I'm pretty surprised that the Baral deck didn't have a counterspell. Maybe there's something else waiting for us. I guess I could return all attacking creatures with an Aetherize, but yeah, opponent just scoops it up. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Sauron, Grixis control. So it's gonna be a tough matchup to have Tannuk stick around. So it's a good thing we have multiple ramp cards, plus some cards we can realistically still cast without warping. So I'll give it a shot. Would definitely prefer 2 mana ramp over 3 mana ramp, but I'll take what I can get. Don't expect any 1 toughness creatures that I need to prioritize. Opponent has the Signet, so they're off to a more exciting start. Opponent plots a card. Could be Alrund's Epiphany, could be card draw or a counterspell. A relic resolves. So now they're just keeping up a bunch of mana, so I'm not inclined to want to play Tannuk. Instead I can play Banner, and then still play a Cursed Mirror afterwards. Even if it's not copying anything in play. So our opponent could technically cast Sauron, decides not to. Alright, so then do we go for Tannuk? It probably gets countered instead of destroyed. Could also just like cast Ilharg, which if they destroy it, it's not a complete disaster, since we can just get it back. Yeah, I just don't think Tannuk is gonna work this turn. Ilharg is legendary, so I could still impend an Overlord if I'd like. Yeah, saw that one coming. So that was their foretold card. In a way, it's reassuring that they didn't have another counterspell in hand. Opponent still doesn't want to tap out. Could just cast Balefire Dragon, which they probably want to pick a fight over. And then next turn maybe Tannuk cheats out a portal to Phyrexia, which can still deal with Sauron if they tap out for it. Yeah, makes use of most of my mana. Could also go for kind of a mid-range threat like Dragonhawk, which is still good if it resolves. Because a Balefire could also be an answer to Sauron if it connects. So maybe we want to keep that as a leftover. And Dragonhawk also legendary, so it would still let me tap it for mana to maybe impend the Overlord. Although I imagine we're just going to want to cast it. So they let Dragonhawk resolve. Can play land from exile. And let's just pass, even though I did have the mana to play Tannuk there. So it's a bit of a waiting game. Opponent's got Mount Doom, which is pretty fitting. And there's Sauron. They could still have a wash away up for Tannuk. So maybe I just hardcast Portal now, which would still deal with Sauron. So I can attack first, maybe we'll find something useful. I'll play the land. Portal resolves. So goodbye Sauron. And now Portal can also get Ilharg back. So maybe our patience paid off. Bolt goes face. Feels a bit desperate. Maybe they're about to discard their hand and draw, who knows. Alright, Time Warp, take an extra turn. Not a disaster when they don't have anything in play. Their own Relic of Legends. Portal get back Ilharg. And our opponent's just gonna scoop it up. Alright, so it only took one portal to get the job done. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing the Gitrog Monster, so black-green landfall. Our hand is missing a Curve Topper besides Ilharg. Chromox and Medallion are both decent. So I'll keep, and then just hope to top deck one of our expensive spells. Can play turn 1 Medallion of Chromox, so that seems worth it. And then turn 2 we can already cast Tannuk. And then we don't even need to warp Ilharg, we could just cast it for 4 mana. And then put whatever other creature we draw into onto the battlefield for free. Missing Mortars gives us some removal, although 4 damage is not enough for the Gitrog Monster. Expedition Map. Can maybe tutor up something powerful like Strip Mine, which they could be playing nowadays. And our opponent plays Boseiju instead of channeling it, so they may not have a ton of lands in hand. Alright, Terrace under my Ruby. And draw Twin Flame. That was a pretty awesome draw. So I can warp Ilharg. Now that we can no longer cast it. Attack, put in Twin Flame, which doubles our damage. Our opponent didn't even wait. But pretty sure they just die anyways, because we are attacking for 12 times 2, I guess is 24. Our opponent falls to 1. And yeah, should be pretty trivial to win from there. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Muldrotha, Sultai, Graveyard. This hand seems way too slow, missing some cheap acceleration. This is not an improvement. Alright, this I can try. Can either bottom a Braid or bottom, I guess, Relic, and then turn 2 Medallion, sets up turn 3 Tannuk. I may want Relic if they remove Tannuk in order to replay it. Yeah, I guess we don't need a Braid. Can maybe take out a mana creature. But I'm just gonna try and set up my own powerful endgame. They do have a turn 1 Elves. But yeah, a Braid on turn 2 still wouldn't really have been able to take it out in a timely manner. Now Rumble fills the graveyard. And also ramps with a Scion token or Spawn token. See the new I Still Explorer in hand to replay lands out of the graveyard. Well, Wintermoon could be a way to slow them down. Yeah, I mean, that could be worth it, especially if we suspect removal on Tannuk. Just play Wintermoon for now, next turn play Relic. And then I can Medallion plus Tannuk, so then if they do remove it, I can still recast it on the following turn potentially. Our opponent does not have any basics. But now they can maybe fetch for them with Scalding Tarn. Sandbar, also not a basic land. Alright, so our opponent's next turn is not going to be super exciting, with only access to 4 mana. I guess with the Explorer it could be 5, since they have an extra land drop. But yeah, I'm not sure how many basics they have total. They might run out of basic islands to get with Scalding Tarn, which cannot get Swamp or Forest. It's gonna be a Fungus, could blow up the Wintermoon. Seems likely. So I'm a little bit short of Tannuk and immediately Warp. Opponents are waiting on the Fungus, but I'm sure they'll activate it soon enough. So, play Medallion, play Tannuk. Can still make a mana with a Relic. But Wintermoon gets taken out instead. Well, next turn our opponent can cast Muldrotha, immediately get stuff back from the graveyard. So we kind of need to make our next turn count, assuming Tannuk survives. Which is not a guarantee. Opponent keeps milling. Yeah, the Explorer seems like a perfect addition to any Muldrotha deck. I would love to warp the battleship to maybe clean the board up a little bit. And there's Muldrotha. A couple options. Goes for Grist. Which I guess transforms right away into the Planeswalker. It's gonna blow up the Medallion. I think Relic would have made more sense. As it's gonna make 2 mana for me. So I can warp Battleship. Although now they put a Ghost form on Muldrotha, so we can't take that out anymore. So, let's see, 4 damage to each creature. I guess we destroy Grist, although they can just get it back next turn. Yeah, this is kind of annoying. Well, I guess never mind, we just have lethal if we warp Dragon Mage and then warp Terror afterwards, as our opponent's at 20 from all those fetch lanes. So that works. Go face. So didn't need the Battleship after all. And we even get a fresh new hand to maybe play with. Alright, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Dawnsire, so can now play with Spacecraft as long as they turn into creatures eventually. And yeah, we've got a keepable hand. Our curve toppers could be a bit better, but we've got a few draw steps in the meantime, and there's a Cityscape Leveler. Although I have to be careful, giving the opponent Power Stones still lets them ramp. Turn to Ornithopter. A Warping Whale is now in the format, so colorless decks have access to a little bit of removal. The Mirror, I should probably just take out with the Carnosaur as opposed to playing Tannuk, because letting them untap with 2 extra mana is pretty scary. So yeah, can't do anything else this turn. And then the Foyer/Warped Space especially has great synergy with Warped cards, as we can play them from exile for free. Opponents got the ring, so they are ramping very nicely, although Winter Moon is pretty brutal in this matchup, since our opponent's mana base is all non-basics. So Relic into Winter Moon. They get to untap 1 land. And then next turn we can hopefully deploy Tannuk at long last. We'll still have the mana to warp afterwards. Alright, opponent actually has a basic waste, so that does help against Winter Moon. And now a Talisman. So they might just be ramping into some big Eldrazi, and they're never going to actually play their commander. Could be possible. For now, Tannuk. And then... yeah, Battleship doesn't do a whole lot. I guess I can destroy the ring without giving the opponent a Power Stone. I think I still like Leveler. Destroy the ring. And then play Cathedral to get the Exalted trigger. So we get +1/+1, destroy Talisman. And while the Power Stones still produce mana for artifacts, they wouldn't be able to cast something like an Eldrazi. So now Leveler is in exile. If I play Warped Space, I can still cast it for 0 mana afterwards. Opponents get the Eternity Elevator, another Spacecraft, although I've learned this cannot be a commander because it doesn't have a power and toughness box. Yeah, let's go for Warped Space. Play Leveler for free. Destroy your elevator. And that's good enough. Alright, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Elspeth, mono-white tokens. The -3 lines up pretty well against our commander, so we do need to be off to a quick start. This hand could deliver, especially if we find something to imprint Labyrinth. And we've got a draw step to maybe find it, so we could already play Mindstone turn 1. Opponent with an Esper Sentinel now, so I guess we're leaning turn 2 Strike Master. Opponent with a Heir Apparent, so maybe this is just a Heir Apparent deck. Winter Moon's not going to be too effective. So yeah, Strike Master lets me play Tannuk next turn. And then we can warp before they can play Elspeth, hopefully. Unless they're about to ramp. If they take out Strike Master, next turn we can Mindstone, pay the tax. And they do have an Apparition. So it's not a only Heir Apparent deck. They're just maybe sprinkled in. Alright, nothing to pitch. Pay the tax. And there's another Heir Apparent. Do not have any real sweepers in hand, so those could turn into a problem. Well, there's our sweeper, Pyroclasm. Lines up pretty well. So I could be convinced to go File into Pyroclasm, and then not pay the tax. If I go for Tannuk, I guess I could still work, but then I'm not going to be able to necessarily Pyroclasm and Warp unless I draw land. which could get a bit messy. So I'll just go File, Pyroclasm. That should buy us a bit more time. Now the only problem is if I play Tannuk and our opponent gets to line 5, Elspeth can clean up. Overlord deals damage to any targets. So that could finish off an Elspeth if they take care of Tannuk. So that's still an option. Yeah, fine. We'll stay back. Alright, no line 5. Although we do have to be careful with the Dragon Mage. Maybe they have some spot removal for Tannuk after all. But yeah, if we Dragon Mage and our opponent hits a couple more Heir Apparents, that could go crazy. They actually have Sheltered by Ghosts. So I'm gonna leave Tannuk in exile. And then we can get our commander back using Carnosaur, perhaps. Opponent offers a trade, reconsiders. So if I Carnosaur, pay the ward, I wouldn't be able to do anything else. So I may as well keep it as an instant speed option. Could also use Overlord, but that's maybe better served at answering Elspeth. And there's Elspeth. Could give the team flying here, which is pretty scary. Yep. So, doesn't really matter if I Carnosaur now or let them resolve the ability. So no ambush with Tannuk. So we take a healthy amount of damage, but now Elspeth is exposed. And we can do some damage of our own here. Do I have enough for lethal is a question. I can warp twice, so I can put in, let's say, the Overlords and the Terror. Overlord comes down, deals 4 to my opponent, they're at 21. When it attacks 4 more, puts their opponent to 17. And then we should easily have enough damage to just win the game here. So, let's see, make sure to warp the right Overlord. Yeah, we want to warp the 6 mana Overlord for 3 mana. Go face. And now warp Terror. Everyone's got double strike and attack for the win. Alright, GG's. Close one. Possible I could have waited a bit longer on the Pyroclasm to catch more Heir Apparents, but it worked out in the end. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing the Chaos Crafter, Mardu artifacts. Hand seems good. Iron Crag into Tannuk. And then Battalion's one of our more exciting cards we can warp. We've got Slagstorm for interaction, Battleship can clear the board. Ooh, and now a Copper Dragon could be fun too. Main question is, can our opponent answer Tannuk? Because we might struggle to redeploy it for 6 mana. Anvil, a nice sacrifice outlet. Yeah, don't really have a choice here. So hope that they cannot remove our commander. Now the Mardu Callers are known for their interaction for creatures. But our opponent's also an artifact synergy deck, so they may not be playing every removal spell known to man. Sword of the Meek, a combo with the Onicult Anvil as well, as they can get it back for free. Equipping the 1/1 token, but we get to untap, so that's what we wanted. So now I can choose either warp Battalion or warp Copper Dragon. I kind of like the Copper Dragon giving me more mana, hopefully. They could be sandbagging a Swords to Plowshares, but I imagine they would have just taken out Tannuk. But if we get a nice hit in, it's going to be a lot easier to deploy the rest of my hand. 5, so Not a particularly high roll. Do I want to cast anything? I could cast a 6 mana Inferno Titan, for instance, which isn't bad. Or I could keep the treasures for next turn. Yeah, I kind of want to keep the treasures, I think. If I warp Battalion into Terror, that could be game over. If they answer Tannuk, I may want the treasures to redeploy it. Opponent plays their commander. Can sacrifice artifacts to make treasures. Can always sacrifice a sword and get it back for free with Anvil. So maybe the sequencing wasn't quite optimal there. And yeah, opponent scoops it up, but yeah, next turn we can pretty easily close it out with our many curve toppers. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing an artifact combo deck with Meria. So, turn 2 Zookeeper, turn 3 Tannuk, and then no shortage of things to cheat out. The Meria deck's not particularly known for having a ton of removal, although maybe they've got a way to destroy an artifact. Turn 1 Ancient Tomb's a nice one. Into Golden Egg. A Braid, not gonna go for the Golden Egg, but might answer their commander. And Golden Egg can also filter their mana, so they could still maybe play Meria, despite lacking both colors. It's gonna be a Steel Seeker first, also pretty good in this deck. And a Hope of Girapur. Okay. Still down to play Tannuk. Opponent does have a lot of random blockers, which can maybe soak up an attack from the Marauders. And Worn Power Stone. So, if I play Worn Power Stone next turn, I would still need to draw land in order to go Tannuk and Warp. So I think I should just play Tannuk now. Hope they play Mountain, so Sundering Titan can destroy both the opponent's forest and mountain. And there's Meria, so they can still make a bunch of mana with the ability. So Meria probably needs to go if we get the chance. A Bonesaw, yeah, lots of free artifacts, which turn into essentially Moxen with Meria's ability, or I guess half a Mox, since you need to tap 2 artifacts to make a green. But yeah, this deck is all about critical mass, get a lot of small trinkets into play, and then Meria starts snowballing using its various abilities. So I wouldn't mind an untapped land off the top, so we can Braid and still maybe Warp. Opponent still has access to a bunch of untapped artifacts, so they can keep going. They could attack us with Hope and sacrifice it to protect Meria. And yeah, that's what they'll do. So can't cast the Braid until the opponent's next turn, which could still hit Meria in their upkeep. And a Blood Moon. Not quite what I need. So, yeah, this turn might be a bit underwhelming. Just attack with Tannuk and then Braid Meria in their turn. And doing it in their upkeep means that they can't float mana and still cast spells in their main phase with it. 2 unknown cards in hand. Possible they've got a protection spell. And that works. Hope that Misty gets like a stomping ground here. Just another forest. So currently Sundering Titan's still forced to blow up my own mountain. Although I guess with Blood Moon, everything turns into a mountain, and then I can hit the opponent's mountain and a forest. Nature's Rhythm for 3, not sure what that's getting. A Junkyard Scrapper, an Alchemy card. Whenever a non-token artifact you control enters, exile a random non-land artifact card with a lesser mana value from your library. You may cast it until the end of your next turn. Seems pretty good, so they can just essentially get a bunch of free artifacts that way and cast them. So Slagstorm is looking necessary. Sure. Goodbye, Zookeeper. So now it's going to be a while before they can replay Meria. Please get a mountain. Yes. So they have 6 mana. Runs out another 1 mana artifact. So next turn they can technically redeploy their commander. If it weren't for Sundering Titan. Fun fact, Sundering Titan's the first rare I've ever opened in a booster pack of Magic, although the art looked a little bit different. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Winter, so Junt, Delirium. Our hand looks promising, Blood Moon could be effective, if they don't make me discard it first, which of course they do. They could also go for Mind Stone. They already have a swamp in play, so Blood Moon loses some effectiveness. But it's still a pretty annoying card to have to deal with. So we'll see what happens. Yeah, opponent takes the Blood Moon. So still a small victory, getting to keep our Mind Stone. So I could play Tannuk turn 3, although against the Jund deck they're gonna have removal. So I might be better off developing my mana or getting Palantir going first. Then again, Grim Flayer, if it starts going off, is also a great way to fill the graveyard for Delirium. Yeah, I guess if we play Banner, next turn I could cast Inferno Titan. So maybe that's still worth it. Even though the sooner we get Palantir going, the better. So if they can get to Delirium, Titan can maybe finish off Grim Flayer. So currently sorcery, creature, artifact. If they have another card in hand with multiple types, they can maybe unearth the mutt. But nope, just goes for a Stick Twister. So yeah, not gonna waste any time. Cast Inferno Titan, deal with the Grim Flayer. And then I wouldn't mind drawing a land so we can Tannuk and Warp. Opponent now has Delirium thanks to the fetch land. Although Stick Twister is still manageable, not as scary as a Grim Flayer. Now a Brute Spinner. Lets them Surveil too. It's possible they're keeping up removal. Stick Twister attacks. So this kind of implies a 4 damage removal spell. Which, yeah, I can just play around by taking 2. Something like Elysium Mortars, something along those lines. Yeah, I don't think we need to take the risk. And then I will take damage. Found the land, so I can Tannuk and Warp. If I Warp Terror, we could present a lot of damage. Is it lethal? 12, 24. A little bit short of lethal. So maybe we prefer the board presence of Thunderhulk. Make some tokens, attack, take out Brute Spinner. They've got an Unholy Heat, which, yeah, I guess is nerfed in Brawl compared to Timeless. So it only deals 4 damage. So that's what they had to finish off Inferno Titan. So that still worked out. Alright, and that'll do it. Awesome. Well, I've been incredibly impressed by Tannuk as a commander. Seems like a much better version compared to Perforos, even though it is more vulnerable to removal. It's just a lot cheaper to get going, can reliably cast it on turn 3 and then start warping on the following turn. And then warping is also just much better than temporarily putting a creature in play and having to sacrifice it. So yeah, I can't praise the deck enough. The mana base is still relatively budget-friendly, since it's mostly just basic mountains, so it's not impossible to put together, but of course a lot of our curve toppers tend to be rares or mythics, so that's where most of your wild cards would end up going to. But for now, I want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.